every single day.
People want to connect with someone who...
Self-expression is life.
It is the challenge. It's a challenge of life.
You can't get mad at other people for not seeing your vision.
It was all about a grind. Like I said, I was selling CDs, DVDs, and clothes out the trunk of my
Whatever
car.
it takes.
This is for the people. Don't forget that. What's up, Lug Life family? Zach here from the Junk Luggers, episode 22 with Steve Shwartz. We are at his headquarters, Device 42 in West Haven, Connecticut. Thank you so much for having us.
Hey, great to be here, Zach.
So Steve is a award-winning author, a angel investor, and a serial entrepreneur. Do you mind just letting everyone know how you got started with AI and how you got to this point?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I moved to Connecticut in 1979 after getting my PhD from Johns Hopkins, actually in a field called cognitive psychology, which at that time there weren't many AI programs, so that was one of the fields that led to an AI career. And I moved up here to work with one of the big names in AI, a professor named Roger Schank at Yale, and actually got to be very good friends with him. And in 1980, late 80, early 81, he decided to start a company. And he said, hey, Steve, why don't you help me start this company? And so I did, and that was the start of my my entrepreneurial career, knowing nothing about business. You know, I remember probably 5 years into it, actually, this would have been the second AI company, Intelligent Business Systems by then. We're sitting in a room, and we were building an accounting system with a natural language front end, an AI front end, so you could just talk to it. And you know, they're sitting there talking about general ledger, you know, and I'm an academic. You know, to me, you know, the generals are at DARPA, you know, so I'm like, okay, who's this general ledger guy? Is he at DARPA? You know, I mean, what I was doing starting a company, you know, knowing nothing about business, I have no idea. But, you know, fortunately there was a lot of money in AI, and they threw it at us, and I learned business the hard way.
I love it. And I think for people that don't know what AI means, do you mind just explaining in layman term what that means?
Sure. So artificial intelligence, it really has two very different meanings. So back in the 1980s and really in the 50s, when the ideas behind AI were first being formulated, the idea was to try to build computers that behaved like people. And when I say behaved, I mean converse in natural language, and you know, to be able to use vision and so forth. But to do it like people, to build computers that had what's now known as artificial general intelligence, which can also be called human-level intelligence, but the idea is that build computers that can do all the kinds of things that people can do, not just be smart at one thing like chess or something like that, but to do a range of intelligent activities like people. Today, artificial intelligence is primarily concerned with getting computers to do tasks really, really well. And when I say tasks, I mean something like machine translation. It does a system that can do machine translation, like Google Translate. It can do that one thing, but really well.
Yep.
Speech recognition, translating an audio waveform into text. So AI has been very successful in these kinds of engineering feats. But fewer people are working on what we worked on in the 1950s and the 1980s, which is trying to build computers that have artificial general intelligence. And I don't blame them. We failed.
Sure.
They've succeeded on the engineering side, so, you know, more power to them.
And I thought your book did an amazing job explaining, you know, like I didn't realize I knew what AI was, but I didn't realize how much it's affecting my everyday life. You brought up Google Translate. Obviously, we both have Teslas, the self-driving part about it. There's so many things that people probably don't even realize AI is involved with, but makes it so, our lives happen on an everyday basis.
Yeah, it's amazing how much AI is getting plugged into everything we do. On a consumer basis, you can talk to your smartphone because of AI. It can name the people in your photos.
Yep.
We're starting to see, autopilot and some level of self-driving. That's a whole other
we'll get
topic.
to that.
We'll get to that. And in the business and government and nonprofit worlds, you're seeing almost every company in the world get into AI. Just things like the ability to use computer vision, to monitor people coming into a building for guns. I mean, it's one application after the other to look for defects in machinery. I have a database that I keep every time I see a new application, and it's just so big.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I think the most interesting thing, which I would love to lean into, is like you didn't plan on getting into being an entrepreneur. You were just super passionate about AI, and you really leaned into that, and it's created this entire career out of it,
Yeah.
One thing that I thought was amazing, which I think a lot of people can learn from, is like, we were talking about it before we started the podcast, but entrepreneurship now is like the hottest thing, right? Like everyone wants to be an entrepreneur because it means you can work for yourself. People think of entrepreneurs as being these super successful, rich people like Elon Musk, and that's not what you were planning on doing.
That's right.
Right? And
right.
One thing that I felt really interesting about when I started researching you is because you were so passionate about this career, the business kind of came along after you started to get your experience and go to school for AI. You went to Johns Hopkins, you went to Yale, and I think that a lot of people can learn from that, right? Because
business is really hard. Academics, I hate to say it, sometimes think they're the smartest people in the world.
Of course.
And if you can't be an academic, well, you go into business.
Right. So true.
And I learned the hard way that business is pretty hard. And another aspect, I have a lot of friends who are professors who teach entrepreneurship, and a lot of times I say to them, and they don't like to hear it, but I don't think kids coming out of college should be starting companies.
100%. Couldn't agree more.
It's one thing if they've experienced a big problem in the world, and they're passionate about going out and fixing it. Then that makes sense. But to sit in an entrepreneurship class and say, let me think about an idea and I'm going to go out and be a successful entrepreneur, that's really, really hard. It's really hard to be a successful entrepreneur without starting with a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, I was able to do it in the AI space. We set out with a technology looking for a problem, which is absolutely the wrong way to go about it.
Of course.
But in 1980, AI was really hot, just like it is today.
Yeah.
It ended up failing by the end of the 1980s, but it was hot, and people were throwing a lot of money at it. And so, I was able to, to unfortunately take that money and be fairly inefficient with it, but
right.
Learned a lot about business. And, by the time I did my third startup in the late 80s, early 90s, I knew what I was doing. But to get somebody to fund you for 8 or 10 years while you're flailing around isn't something that everybody's going to be able to do.
For sure. And I think you see that all the time now, right? Like some of the largest tech companies never even have generated a profit, yet people are still pumping money into it. And for me, kind of starting a family homegrown business and making those mistakes cost us a lot of money, relatively speaking, but we learned a lot versus what you are very honest about when you look into your history is just like, we made mistakes that cost millions of dollars, and it took years to learn from those mistakes.
Yeah.
And one thing that I really found interesting is you discussing who you should be looking for when creating a new startup. Do you mind just talking through that?
Sure. So, and I'm not sure if this is exactly the question you're asking, but if not, we can get to it. But I think one of the most important things, and we touched on it just a minute ago, that an entrepreneur can do is to have experienced a problem and be passionate about solving it.
Yep.
So, I'm going to fast forward to Device 42, where we are today.
Yep.
It was 2012. I had retired from Tango. Tango was in 2011. I think we were the 5th best IPO of 2011. I mean, it was, really, really soaring and doing really well. It had some problems after that, but so 2012, I was retired. I said, the stress of managing people, I've had enough.
Yeah.
And I was giving talks, doing angel investing, and my co-founder of Device 42, Raj, heard me talk, and we went out for coffee, and he told me his idea. He had been a long-time IT consultant, and he would go in to do digital transformations, and he would spend, every time he went into a new customer site, he'd spend 60 or 70% of his time trying to figure out where everything was.
Yeah.
What servers do they have, what network components, what cloud components, what applications, and how were they all related to each other. And he'd spend 60 or 70% of his time, he'd end up at the end of an engagement giving the customer an Excel spreadsheet. This is how everything fits together.
Yeah.
And then it would be out of date in a week. And he said, I want to solve that problem. And we talked about it for a long time. And in addition to being an entrepreneur, I had been a CTO, and I said, if I had had a tool like that, my whole career would have been a lot easier.
Yeah.
So I said, you know what? Let's build it. And so the two of us rented a desk at a co-working facility. We wrote the code.
Love it.
We started selling it on the internet. Actually, he had started writing it and selling it, a little bit before I joined. But we went in, he had quit his job, and we sold it over the internet. We did the marketing, and after 2 years, we had 80 customers, $600,000 in recurring revenue, and it was getting kind of hard to manage it by ourselves.
Yeah.
So we went out and raised our one and only round of financing, and started hiring people, and that's when we leased this building, and it's been very successful.
Sure.
From there. But the point is, the only thing that got me out of retirement was a really good idea that was solvable.
Yeah, and I think, something at that point, which it's probably when you started, well, you've had multiple successful IPOs, but something that I remember reading about is you can't hire someone from these larger corporations to come work in a startup, right?
Right.
Because they're used to working on one single task, and they don't like making mistakes because they look like they failed, right? But it really, in a startup and the entrepreneurship world, is you have to embrace failure.
You have to.
Right?
You have to embrace failure, and you have to embrace the 80-20 rule. You can't do anything to perfection because you just don't have time, because you've got to move on. You've always got a stack of things this high that you should be doing. You have to prioritize them, only do the most important ones, and you just can't, finish them off and polish them up and make it into a nice package. You gotta get it to the enough point and move on to the next one.
I love it. And I think that one thing that really sticks out for me is just like, when you start a successful company, the amount of decisions that you have to make on the fly or in a day or in a week is so different than, let's say, working for a large corporation like IBM, or I used to work for Deloitte, and being able to make those decisions is stressful, right? And that's why you say, I know you mentioned if you were to create a new startup, you recommend to your readers hire someone that not only embraces entrepreneurship, but also has experience, right? So you can learn from their mistakes.
That's right, because I've made so many mistakes over my career, and I really felt like, and I think I think Raj would tell you this also, that I was able to come in and help avoid a lot of mistakes. And it was almost on a daily basis.
Of course.
At the same time, I've made so many mistakes that I'm very conservative.
Yeah.
So, I had to really force myself not to say, no, that won't work. No, that won't work. No,
Absolutely,
that won't work. It's a two-sided benefit.
That's awesome. And I know you recently wrote this book. What made you want to, embrace it? I think one of the most interesting parts of the book, which before I read it, honestly, I felt the same way. I was scared of AI. Movies portray it that, like, in the future, robots are going to basically take over our lives and they're going to control us. And I think hearing about not only why we should embrace it, but also some of the rules and regulations that should go into the future of AI, I thought you nailed it on the head, just explaining, not only where we're going, but also what we should be thinking about.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. But the motivation was a little different. I wanted to do all of that, but I was motivated because it started when I don't know if you remember, but in 2010, maybe, the IBM's Deep QA Watson computer system beat 2 Jeopardy champions. Yep. And I thought that was great. I was really rooting for the computer, and I thought it was great. And I kind of had an idea of what was going on under the hood, and I knew it wasn't real thinking or real intelligence, even though it was really able to answer questions, very impressively. But then IBM started marketing it as Watson can think like a person, it can talk to you, it can reason, and that really rubbed me the wrong way. And then Microsoft developed a system that could, do like a reading comprehension test in school. It would read a paragraph. Is the answer A, B, or C? And it would give the right answer. But it was doing it with tricks, not with really understanding the passage. And Microsoft came out and said, we've invented a system that reads better than people, or reads as well as people. And I remember I went out to dinner with Roger Schenck, the well-known professor at Yale, and in New York, and I said, this stuff really, really bothers me.
Of course.
I'm almost tempted to write a book about it. He said, well, you're the best person I know of to write that book, for all these reasons. And so I went ahead and did it. And
that was probably very different than any other entrepreneurship journey you've taken, right? Because how long did it take you to write the book?
Well, what was interesting was I didn't realize how much AI had changed.
Oh, yeah, true.
Even though I'd kept up with a lot of it. And so I really had to do a lot of catch-up. I literally probably read, 10 or 20,000 different articles. And I took notes, and I, made notes for myself, and it eventually became what's on my website now is AI 101, which goes into fairly technical detail with a lot of references about all the different areas of AI. So that was something that I didn't expect, but I enjoy doing it, and I'm still updating it, and I still enjoy updating it. Yeah, it's probably never ending. Yeah, which is okay with me.
Yeah,
I'm willing to live forever.
For sure. One thing that I find really interesting is how many times you thought you were going to retire and then came back into the business world. So that's probably that's a blessing, right? That you were able to retire, but then your passion always found your way back into entrepreneurship. So why do you think this is? What part of this journey sucks you back in?
I really enjoy a lot about building a company. I really enjoy writing code. In fact, I probably enjoy everything about building a company when you're just starting it, and it's craziness, and it's
exciting.
Just one or two of you, and there's so much to do, and and then you start growing the company.
Yeah.
And everything about the growth
I know that feeling.
takes away from the stuff I don't
I
like.
know that feeling very well.
You start hiring people, and people have people problems, and you get territory problems, and people don't work out, and you have to fire them, and that's just not fun. And
No,
it's
not.
really stressful, and I don't know if I can ever do that again. I'll tell you the truth. Of course, I didn't know back then either, but Device 42 actually happened like I kind of expected it to, because the first couple of years really were fun. I mean, every time you get a customer, you get inbound. We never left the office to sell anybody.
Of course.
And we'd get big companies from Europe, and
Yeah.
they'd become our customers. And that was really cool.
It's like your badge.
Like your badge, yeah.
You get to see all these amazing companies. When I went to Device 42's website, you see these huge companies now, and it's like your badge of honor. Like, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Where you start and then where you end up.
Yeah. It's really cool, and it's I'm thrilled with where Device 42 is today and how it's progressed, but along the way there was some roadkill.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I know Roger's he's heard me say this a million times, but the most exciting part of my entrepreneurship journey was the beginning. You know, that 5th floor walk up, 100 square foot apartment in New York City, not knowing if you're going to succeed, you know, that passion of working super early mornings to late nights.
Yeah.
And now, 10 years later, it's a lot of managing people. It's putting together budgets, things that you never did in the beginning because you're just grinding. And
Exactly.
a lot of new entrepreneurs come to me. Some ask for investments, right? Because they don't want to start off without any. They don't have any capital by themselves. But I know something that you're super passionate about is being an angel investor.
Yeah.
So I'm sure people come to you all the time looking for investments. And for people that are looking to go that route, like, what would you recommend to them, and like, what are you looking for in terms of an angel investment?
Yeah, so one thing people don't understand is, I think angel is an unfortunate name.
Yeah.
Because it makes it sound like, we're doing this, just to benefit the entrepreneurs. And I will say that most angel investors really do want to help entrepreneurs, and they help entrepreneurs get their pitches together and so forth. But when it comes time to putting their money into a company, they want a return.
Of course.
And because we invest so early, the statistics aren't good.
Right.
So, 6 or 7 of 10 companies that you invest in are going to fail outright.
Of course.
Just to simplify the math, suppose you invest $1 in each of 10 companies, right? And 9 of them fail, and 1 company's a success. It returns 10 times your money.
You break
Okay.
even.
You break even. You would have been better off putting your money in the bank.
Yeah.
So when I tell entrepreneurs that we're looking for a company that can return 20 times our money, I have to explain that math to them, because otherwise we seem really greedy.
Right.
But, if a company can't return 20 times your money,
What's the point?
what's the point? Because you're going to have so many losers. So that's something we explain. Another thing is, we ask entrepreneurs what their use of funds is going to be. So you're going to raise $1 million or $2 million. What are you going to do with it? And we always get back, well, we're going to put 20% into R&D and 30% over here. And I say, no, that's not what we mean. So you're going to take $1 million, and where's that going to get you? So you'll probably need another round of financing. So you're going to raise $1 million. You're going to get to what in revenue? What's your burn rate going to be at the end? And so on and so forth. What milestones are you going to achieve with our money that's going to make the company worth a lot more money, so that now when you go out and raise more money, it'll be at a much higher valuation, and it'll be good for everybody. So when I help entrepreneurs create a pitch, that's always the overarching idea. What are we going to do with the money to get us to that set of milestones that's going to make the company worth more?
Right. Because most likely if you're taking one round of investment, you're going to need more to be able to get the machine going to the point where you're actually generating some sort of profit.
That's exactly right.
And, when I hear you talk about that, I think a lot about Shark Tank, right? Like, That's what I feel like is getting people so excited nowadays is they see Mark Cuban or they see Damon John and they see that not only are they going to get this brand recognition by being on TV, but they're also going to have this person on their side that's been there, done that. Is that something in angel investment that you offer, or is that something that you only do if you're passionate about the project?
All angel investors would like to think that we bring more than our money to the table. And we do. We definitely bring more than our money to the table. We don't have the connections of the people on Shark Tank. And the reality is, a lot of times, in fact, most of the time we invest, and the entrepreneurs never ask us for any help except maybe introductions to prospective customers, which is fine. If you think about your business, if you had to have an advisor tell you how to make every decision, that would be kind of crazy because you'd have the advisor on the phone all day long, right? So, even if the entrepreneurs do come to us for advice, we can't hold their hands all day long. It's maybe once a week at best. So you got to have an entrepreneur who's got the experience, or at least the wherewithal somehow to figure it out themselves.
Yeah. Totally agree. And I think that, one thing that I'm thinking about when hearing you talk is just, you have a ton of experience. You've made a lot of mistakes. Being an entrepreneur means you like making decisions. You don't want someone to hold your hand. And I think that's the part that makes people excited about taking that career, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, mistakes, you learn a lot from your mistakes. And there's another piece of advice I give entrepreneurs that resulted that might be the biggest mistake of my life. So in 1999, you've probably used OpenTable to order,
of course,
to find a restaurant. So in 1999, we started a company. OpenTable at that time, their business model was to put a very expensive server at their cost into every restaurant.
Wow.
And we said, that's crazy. Let's do it in the cloud. So we raised $1 million, and we built a great product. And then the crash of 2000 happened, and there wasn't a dollar to be found for follow-on investment anywhere. And, so the advice I give entrepreneurs is, take more money than you think you're going to need. You're worried about dilution, but the reality is, if the company's successful, you're going to be financially independent, and you're going to have more money than you ever wanted. And if you have 30% more than you ever wanted, what difference is it going to make to you?
Of course.
On the other hand, if you don't take enough and your company fails,
you're at zero.
You're
negative.
Toast. Yeah. You're toast. And I see too many companies. One of my more recent investments in AI, actually, I almost pleaded with the guy. I actually brought him investors.
Wow.
I had somebody who wanted to put in $500,000, and he said no.
Because he didn't want to give away any more of his shares.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and now he's going to raise a round that's either a down round or a flat round.
Wow. Because at the end of the day, for anyone watching right now, the name of the game is cash. Don't run out of cash. If you do, it doesn't matter how great your idea is, you're done.
Right.
And I know that, when I was listening to other podcasts you've done or articles that you've written, people kept asking you, like, how do you decide what you're going to invest in? And you were talking about how you like to lean into AI, but sometimes you make a decision to go into something that isn't AI.
Yeah.
What do you feel like if you don't invest in something that's in AI, like how do you decide that? What do you usually lean into?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, I just had a biotech investment come back with a 22x return. I know nothing about biotech. But the nice thing about being part of an angel investor group, and I'm part of New York Angels and Angel Investor Forum here in Connecticut, and both invested in this company, is that you get the benefit of people who used to be successful entrepreneurs in all kinds of different fields. So you get a lot of successful biotech entrepreneurs, doctors, finance people who all look at things, they just look into the company at things you would never have thought of. And, so like in that biotech company, I really liked the CEO. I mean, I just got a good vibe from him. I could tell he's a smart guy, down to earth, and he was going to make it work. And, all the experts who were fellow investors, it passed all their tests, so I invested. So there's a lot of investments like that. There's another one in the veterinarian industry where this woman has a company named Torigen that is developing vaccines for animals, and it's really successful. It's just doing great. I mean, same thing. I can't evaluate a company like that on my own.
Yeah.
But I thought a lot of the CEO and my fellow investors who were experts. It passed all their tests, so I invested. And I hate to say it.
Say it.
I think I do better with those investments than I do with the ones where I'm the expert.
Yeah, it's true. I think a couple really good points that you just brought up are, one, you're investing in the people, not only just the brand. A lot of times people come to me and I don't have nearly as much experience as you. My experience is in furniture removal, right? It's nothing to do with that. But this is an idea they have on the side of their 9 to 5.
Right.
And a lot of times my first recommendation to someone is, you got to be all in all day, every day for this to be successful. Otherwise, someone else is going to go all in. So, a lot of times when I'm looking at, is it worth me mentoring a new person who's trying to get into a new entrepreneurship idea? It's how much of their time they're willing to invest.
Yeah.
Another thing that comes to mind is it seems like you've had a lot of mentors along the way, and you've been a mentor to a lot of people.
Absolutely.
So I'm curious if you can just talk about how did you find these mentors as your career started to blossom?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the way I did it is not the way other people should do it. I was just kind of along for the ride, and the waves just took me where they took me. But I had met Roger Schenk, and he really mentored me on the AI side, and there was a lot of credibility and investment that came out of that, and a lot of the investors were a big help, and the CEOs we brought in, and the business people we brought in were a lot of help. And what happened to me was that first company that I started with Roger, Cognitive Systems, actually made an IPO. But we were such bad business people that we had hired a crooked CFO.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And, and he didn't physically steal the money, but he made the money disappear.
You might as well.
Yeah, he might as well have. And then the second company was almost successful, but we had some legitimate business issues. And then the third company, I knew exactly. There was a problem. I knew how to solve it. I had I knew how to develop the technology. I went to all the investors. I knew all the VCs. He said, Steve, we love you, but you're 0 for 2. But they made a lot of introductions for me.
Yeah.
And so I ended up with 5 or 6 companies that were interested in buying my company, including, I don't know, are you a football fan?
Oh, yeah.
You remember Fran Tarkenton?
Mm-hmm.
So he had a company in, I guess this would have been 82 or 83. That was a high flyer. a software high flyer. And I went down to Atlanta to meet with him, and I was really excited. I mean, I didn't know if it was the best fit for my company, but I really wanted to meet Fran Tarkenson. And I sat in the conference room, and the CTO kept coming in saying, Fran's got busy with this. I'm sorry. He's got to wait. And at the end of the day, he said, I'm sorry, but we're just not going to be able to do the deal. You'll read about it in the paper tomorrow. And accounting issues, and the company completely blew up and collapsed the next day. Yeah.
Crazy.
So timing is everything. That would have been a horrible deal for me to do. There were other deals. Talk about timing. That company that I did start, when I did sell it, I sold it, and it made me financially independent. But I didn't make a huge amount of money on it. And at the time, I had two big competitors. And if you looked at the competitive analyses in the trade press, it was my company and these other two companies. And 10 years later, after I sold, one of them sold for $7 billion.
Oh my
that was
God.
Business Objects, and the other one, Cognos, sold for $5 billion.
Wow.
Yeah.
So going back to timing, sometimes if you have that proper cash flow, and you don't need to go do the IPO, you can make a lot more money holding on.
Yeah.
I think something that's really relevant right now is people are starting companies to go public, right? So for anyone that's planning on doing that, do you mind just doing some experience shares on what you've learned from having the fifth best IPO of 2011?
Yeah, so Tango was a company that I led one of the two angel groups that invested in Tango in, I'm going to say 2001. And the CEO, they were really just getting started. The CEO was just so impressive. He had built a $50 million company before, and he was just so smart, and a guy who you just couldn't say no to. I don't know if I would have been able to say no to him.
Wow.
And so we made the investment. He did a couple of pivots, or he did one big pivot, and just grew the company over time to a $200 million company and the public offering. And he really gets the credit for that. I was on the board for, I think, 6 or 7 years, and then I joined for 3 years as the CTO, to prepare for the public offering. But I wouldn't put my role as a real big success factor other than the early investment.
Sure.
So what was the question? Sorry, Zach.
For anyone that is thinking this strategy of I want to go public, what would you recommend for them to think about before going? Because to me that's a strategy. I never thought to myself I was going to start a company to one day sell it and make a shit ton of money and move on.
Yeah.
My idea was create a structurally sound company where I could grow it organically over time.
Right, and I actually think that's the better strategy. I mean, I don't really see how you can start a company and plan to go public unless you're starting it with, tens of millions of dollars of investment. You're someone who's done it before, and everybody's throwing money at you, and okay, that makes sense. But if you're like most entrepreneurs, I think the better approach is to, and whether you grow it organically or whether you plan on doing multiple rounds of financing, they're two very different strategies. Yeah. But I think the key thing is you want to significantly increase your company's value every year, and everything else 100%. Will fall into place. Yeah. You can keep running it, you can sell it to a strategic investor, you can sell it to a private equity investor, or if you get that far, you can take it public. But I don't like to look that far ahead. I want to, when I invest, I want a CEO who's committed to building value every year for the shareholders, and when the market is ripe, to take the exit, whatever that exit's going to be.
I think something that you just talked about is pivoting. I know also when researching you talked a lot about being lean and being able to be nimble on your feet and see when you have a really good opportunity that you might not have seen in the beginning. That definitely happened with junk luggers, and I think that for me, hearing that, that's like one of the best pieces of advice you can give, because there's no way when I was 18 years old that I could have seen what I see now at 35 years old.
Right.
But when you see a great opportunity come across your plate, if you're a large corporation, you're not going to be able to pivot that fast.
Right.
So it seems like that has been a sound strategy for you in a lot of the businesses you've been involved with. Do you mind just talking about how being lean and also being able to see an opportunity and move on it has played a part in your success?
Absolutely. And I think, I mentioned before that I just kind of rode the wave and I got a little bit lucky. But I think the one thing I've been good at my whole career is taking advantage of opportunities when they're there. And I think that's very important, as an individual and as a company. Another thing I would say about pivoting is, as a company, you got to be on the lookout for opportunities. You got to look hard and say what's working, what's not working, and if you have to pivot, you've got to pivot. But the one thing I would say about pivoting to entrepreneurs is I think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding about pivoting.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurs say, well, I'll try it. If it doesn't work, I'll just raise more money and pivot. It doesn't work that way. If you don't make it,
you're done.
You're done. You can't raise more money to pivot.
Yeah, and I think when I hear you talk about that, I think a lot about some of the really big success stories we've heard. How Blockbuster had an opportunity to buy Netflix, but they're like, "You're crazy. No one's going to ever do that." And Blockbuster never pivoted, and in return, they were done. But then the other way is, there's I'm blanking on the name, but the huge movie app where they kept pivoting.
Oh, right.
And they just ran out of money, and now they raised. It was the most successful amount of funds they've ever raised, and they're completely out of business.
Yeah.
So to me, it sounds like you've got limited amount of opportunities to pivot, but if you're going to do it, make sure it's the way you want to go.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And I look at the pivot at Tango was really brilliant. I mean, the original plan was to basically be the computer back end for RFQs for telecom services.
Yep.
And then the CEO decided, there's a lot of people doing that, a lot of competition. What we really should do is build a software business so that we can make telecom less expensive for people. So rather than going out and raising another round of financing to do that, he hired 2 engineers. He started building the software on the side, and then he started selling it on the side and slowly morphed the business. And I think that's the way you pivot.
Love it. I think before we were talking about, we both have Teslas, and, reading all about AI in your book and then thinking about how it affects my Tesla. We were talking about how autopilot, it works, but you can't rely on it 100%.
Right.
Where do you think the future of automation when it comes to Teslas is going to go? And where are the failures that you see right now in the technology?
It's really interesting because if you dig into how the Tesla autopilot technology works, and the former head of AI technology there, Andrej Karpathy, used to give a lot of talks and published a lot about it. And it's fascinating what they do. They have all of these really sophisticated architectures, and the way they get data from every car, and they use that data to train the system to get better and better. But ultimately, what they have is a bunch of little pieces of AI technology that can each do one thing. So they've got a supervised learning system that can recognize pedestrians.
Yep.
and they've got another one that can recognize stop signs and stop lights, and they put all that together, and they're developing more and more technology, so they're using AI a little bit more to make decisions. But there are two problems with it. One is that even though it can recognize pedestrians and stoplights, it doesn't do it the way people do it. So it might do it really well, but that type of technology makes stupid mistakes also. And I think
A lot, yeah.
I think that's what we've seen with Teslas that have like crashed into like white vans
Yep.
and emergency vehicles on the side of the road.
Yep.
They don't see them the same way that people see them.
Of course.
So I think that's a big problem. Where the self-driving technology is, may be successful. Well, certainly, if you've got a corporate campus, you want to go from point A to point B.
It'll work.
It works. It's there today. There's very few things that can go wrong. They go 5-10 miles an hour. They have vision, so if a dog runs in front, they can stop. That can work. The next level up is maybe delivery systems. These little robots that you put a couple of pizzas in and they'll deliver them to you. They'll go along the sidewalk or along the streets very slowly. Same kind of thing. That can work because all the streets. You go slow enough so that they don't, you're not going to really hurt somebody.
Sure.
And then the next step is the self-driving taxis that they're testing all over the world, and they're starting to actually give rides in self-driving, driverless taxis now. That's a little bit more problematic, but I think it can work. You map out the streets, so every inch of every street, where every hydrant is, where every crack in the road is. So you can build AI technology to navigate those streets. I think we'll see a lot of traffic jams caused by self-driving cars because they'll get to situations that they just don't know what to do, and then they'll stop. And I forget, I read about it somewhere. It might have been San Francisco, where a whole fleet had to, just kind of stopped because of something that happened. I forget what it was. But when it comes to consumer vehicles, for me to buy a Tesla I can just get in the back seat and it'll drive me to grandma's house.
Why would you trust it?
It can't work. And the reason it can't work is because with people, we can think and reason. So if I get up in the morning and it's cold out, I worry about black ice.
Yep.
If I see somebody swerving a little bit, I worry that they're drunk.
Of course.
If I see, like today, I was driving and there was an orange sign that was kind of sticking out a little too far into the road. I waited until the cars on the other side of the road went by, and then I went around it. How do I do that? Well, common sense reasoning. It's something that every human being, no matter how intelligent they are, has the ability to do. And it's nobody knows how to build common sense reasoning into computers. So if you look at the self-driving car situation, consumer vehicles, think about it this way. There's 1 billion drivers in the world. I think everybody I know has 1 or 2 or 5 unique driving experiences that haven't happened to anybody else. So even say it's just one. Everybody's had one unique experience. That's 1 billion different experiences.
Yeah.
How is the Tesla going to learn all of those? It can't think and reason, so it has to be trained for all 1 billion of those.
Yeah.
How's that going to happen?
And I think my wife would agree with you because she gets furious at me when I'm driving and we have our daughter in the back, and then all of a sudden it sees a blinking yellow light and it slams on the brakes, and she tells me, why do you need to have it in autopilot? Why can't you just drive it yourself? And I think that I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I think, part of what you talk about in the book is this is why AI is not going to replace humans, because we have this reasonable thought process that computers never will. What do you think that we should be thinking about in terms of rules and regulations to avoid some of these mistakes with AI?
Yeah, that's a great question. If AI were really going to become intelligent, like R2-D2 in science fiction movies, or the fearsome Terminator that we could think and reason, and An AI system like that could take courses and read books and learn to do almost any job. If you had viruses, it could be computer viruses. You could have an intelligent computer virus that could navigate itself around the network. In that case, you would need rules and regulations about general AI.
Yep.
You know, maybe it's not Isaac Asimov's 3 laws of robotics. You know, number 1, you will never hurt a human. Number 2, you will not allow a human to come to harm. And number 3, you won't let yourself come to harm if you don't. You know, those don't really work. People have written about them. But then you would need some regulations like that. But that's not in the near future. And I doubt that anybody will live to see a computer or a robot that intelligent. So why worry about that today? What we should be worried about are, for example, regulating self-driving cars.
Yep.
We should be worried about privacy. We should be worried about discrimination, which is a big issue with AI.
Yeah.
Weapons of war. There are a lot of issues deep fakes.
Yep.
But those are all different, and I think need different solutions.
Sure. And it's, you know, thinking about that, it's like we need to have rules and regulations for now, and then ones that we're thinking about for the near future, but let's not worry about the ones that are 100 years away from
Exactly.
now. But then also, it seems like you're saying let's not over-regulate, because then we'll slow down the AI process, correct?
Yes. I'm not too worried about overregulation because I don't see it happening yet.
Okay.
You know, the place where we have the most AI regulation is in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So they started off with privacy, you know, even outside of AI. And now, you know, more recently they passed laws that any AI system that's involved in a high-risk activity, like that involves a person's fate, you know, catching criminals, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Very strict rules around those.
Sure.
But I think that's good, and I think we'll adopt those over here also.
Yeah, you're seeing that with Apple trying to unlock phones for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think all of that is good. Self-driving cars, I think there needs to be a lot more regulation.
Yeah.
You know, people are worried that regulation is going to stop the progress, and we need self-driving cars because, you know, they don't drive drunk.
Right.
They're safe, and we have so many accidents that kill people. So we need to get the self-driving cars as fast as we can. But the problem is the technology isn't there, and if we try to put them out on the road too soon, we're going to have more. We need, in my view, are regulations that require the auto manufacturers to prove that the cars are safe.
Yep.
And I think there are ways to do that.
Yeah, for sure.
And B, take responsibility for accidents.
Yeah.
So if you put me in a car that you say can drive me to grandma's house, and the car gets in an accident, you, the manufacturer, should be responsible.
Which right now it's not.
Which is not.
It's
right.
just your statistic and failures versus success stories.
Right, exactly.
I don't know if this is too out of your field, but people like Roger are obsessed with crypto, right? And we're very excited about where cryptocurrency was going in terms of the evolution of our banking currency. Obviously, that has taken a complete 180 in the last couple of years. You know, what are your thoughts on the future of, you know, the deregulation of the financial institutions and going into these more general cryptocurrency areas?
Yeah, you know, it really isn't my expertise. It's, as an angel investor, we see a lot of crypto and blockchain investments, and you know, probably the majority or the biggest group of angel investors are people with financial industry backgrounds.
Yeah.
You know, so I rely on them, and I just don't know. I mean, I see, you know, Coinbase is doing fantastic. They've built an incredible business. I wish I had invested in it.
Of course.
But I don't really feel like I have the expertise. Now, blockchain, on the other hand, has some, you know, really interesting benefits.
Yeah.
my group invested, I didn't, but I probably should have, invested in a company that's using blockchain to essentially authenticate art, or I forget the term, but so that you know, what's the term? So that you know that the art is legitimate and who produced it. And I think, there are uses like that are great. And then there's the whole metaverse thing, which is, really the first step is going to be 3D virtual reality.
Yeah, which we were talking about before. Obviously you said this is pretty rare that we come to this office nowadays. You've been working remote and you have this amazing facility for Device42, and we're talking about what the future may bring in terms of people working at home versus working in an office setting. Obviously, for someone like myself, I'm very passionate about a workplace environment because I think a lot of great ideas come out of two people being together. So, what do you think in terms of if you're putting together an investment for someone, or let's say 20 years ago, 10 years ago, if you were, you and your partner started at a sharing space, I'm sure that was crucial, right, for the beginning stages. So any thoughts on like where we're going in the future in terms of remote versus in-person businesses and entrepreneurs?
Yeah, it seems like for most companies, if you don't really have to have people on site, they're going either fully remote or partially remote and just bringing people in, maybe a couple of days a week or just for meetings. I think those couple of days a week and or team meetings and team events, I think those are going to be really, really important.
I agree.
Going down the road. I'm worried about employee productivity, employee mental health, stuck in your home office.
Yeah.
You don't get to interact with people. Zoom, you're really not really interacting with people. 100%.
I also think that sometimes I find myself, I've heard both arguments a lot, obviously from the pandemic. I've done both ways. I think going to an office, being super productive, quality over quantity, and then leaving and going back to my home is a great separation of work versus personal space. And I find myself sometimes when I work from home, something that usually takes me a couple hours might take me 8 hours and just extends my day longer, and I don't have that quality time with my daughter that I would if I just went to the office. So I was just curious on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%, yeah.
If you were to have a billboard anywhere in the world, what do you think, what would it say and why, and where would it be?
So, the thing I like doing most right now is working with startup natural language processing companies that are using the new great NLP technology. So my billboard would probably say, if you've got one of those companies, I'd love to help.
Awesome. I love it. How can people reach out to you if they want to connect?
So through my website, aiperspectives.com, or on LinkedIn.
Awesome. That wraps up episode 22. Thank you so much, Steve. I appreciate how generous you were with your time and sharing. And, I hope everyone got some sort of insight out of this. You've done so many incredible things like writing a book, being an angel investment, and being a serial entrepreneur. And I just appreciate how much insight you have in all these industries that you can share with all of our viewers. So I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you, Zach. It's been fun. And and I'd like to hear some about your journey at some point too, because you can't go anywhere without seeing a junk lugger sign.
Thank you so much. Everyone, like, subscribe, comment, and thank you so much to Steve for his time.